Welcome everybody. My name is Andrew Morgan. I'm honored to be moderating today's webinar with the folks you're seeing here, which I'll introduce momentarily. But really wanted to do a state of the insurance industry and the backdrop of this, which I'll set the stage shortly. There's a lot going on, a lot changing, and I think a lot of benefactors will be the changes as MSPs. Not only have we been benefactors, but I think we will be more so with the continuing scrutiny of what the insurance companies want to see. In terms of it's being recorded, it'll be posted on YouTube. The folks from FifthWall, the folks from CyberFOX will, send out a URL afterwards. By the way, just a quick announcement, on some upcoming events, which I will mention at the end again for people that maybe not have been here. But if you're attending IT Nation, they're doing an awesome event, Mark. So this is the day before, correct? Because it's really the 8th through 10th. So this is like the Tuesday, I'm assuming?
Yeah, so if they're flying in, sometimes there's pre-days at IT Nation. So some people come, So it's that evening before the official start of IT.
Got it. So you want to click that QR code if you're doing any of the pre-days and you want to go to the Top Golf event. And I think you're doing it with Huntress, a few different companies that you're doing it with, Mark, if I recall correctly.
We are definitely Huntress. I forget the other one, but yeah, a couple of our vendor partners. And boy, last year we had about 120 people show up, so it was a blast.
Yeah, awesome. And then the other thing, you have a chance to win a $250 gift card. You guys are going to be doing a live demo on the 25th at 2 p.m. So I think I got all of the housekeeping out of the way. Let me kind of set the stage here, and then I'll take this down momentarily. I'm going to take it down right now because I'm probably one of the worst at multitasking. My mom, who was a school teacher, used to call it, Mark, concrete sequential. I can only do one thing at a time, and that can be challenging as well. So before I introduce our co-hosts and our panelists, let me kind of just set the stage here. As I shared, we know in the past, few years, again, we always kind of, I like to read, I don't know if this is good or bad, but really I think whether you want to look at SolarWinds, the Kaseya incident, the Exchange, those supply chain attacks, it was like this, almost like, the straw that broke the camel's back, if you will, even though, things have been mounting for a while. That was right around those time frames. We know that cyber insurance, especially the reinsurers, flipped their lids because of the losses that they were incurring. And the good news for MSPs is we've been tremendous benefactors over this, by and large, over the past few years. I mean, they have driven, I don't know an MSP that can tell me, at least I haven't found, maybe someone in chat can say otherwise, that it's been bad. The security controls, the policies, to get cyber, although premiums have gone sky high, and the scrutiny of controls has gone up tremendously. The benefactors certainly is, you've gotten more secure customers and you've gotten higher MRR. And then recently, Reid, we did a CyberCall where all of a sudden there was now cyber warranties and being brought into the mix. And the good thing about this is that I took away from that CyberCall was people weren't saying, oh, it's one versus the other. In fact, they're incredibly complementary to one another. And again, if anything, driving more awareness and again, more, I think, MRR for MSPs. So that's kind of the backdrop. And I kind of wanted to bring things forward to today. And we're going to kick it off momentarily with Reid. But before I do, and go into where we are in the state of cyber insurance, Reid, why don't we start off with you? Welcome. And introduce yourself and go to your counterpart here.
Sure thing. Well, thanks, Andrew. My mother said something very similar. She said I'm a single threader, right? So
Oh,
that was kind of her nice way of saying one thing at a time,
okay.
right? So I can appreciate that. Hi, everyone. My name is Reid Wellock. I'm the president of FifthWall Solutions. For those of you who don't know, we're a cyber insurance focused wholesaler. We're nationally based in Pittsburgh, and we've been doing this for the better part of about 8 years, working with retail agents. And then in the past 2.5 years, we've been working predominantly now with and through MSPs, really with the narrative that Andrew just described is as this has become a very leverageable opportunity for MSPs, we've been really trying to drive a process to support that and gain partnerships. And that'll lead me to introduce Will Brooks, who's been at the tip of our spear there. So Will, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm surprised with Andrew tossing up the counterpart comment. You didn't call me R2D2, but it's all good. I mean, that would mean you're C3PO, which I don't blame
Yeah, I
you
don't
for
want to
saying that. So,
do that to myself.
anyway, so yeah, my name's Will Brooks. I am kind of the lead intro for MSPs when they are interested in partnering with FifthWall. So they're gonna talk to me first, and we're gonna have a great conversation all about what they're dealing with cyber insurance and what that's all looking like, what's the landscape. But to put it real simply, I am the major tech nerd to Reid's major insurance nerd, and we kind of work together in that vein to run the gamut there and all those things.
Thanks for joining, Will. Thanks for
Yeah.
FifthWall joining us today. So, Mark, you're filling in for Wes, who had a conflict, and we're going to put you on the spot, and you're going to have to know everything Wes knows.
I do. You can call me Les Spencer today.
Les Spencer.
Les Spencer.
Oh, wow.
That's
So,
thanks for joining, Mark.
Yeah. So, yeah, real quickly, my background is not specifically cybersecurity. It is technology, marketing and product marketing for ConnectWise for a long time. And actually an auditor. I worked at your SOC 2 auditors, and those guys worked there as well. And then recently LionGuard, and now CyberFOX. So really touching all around cybersecurity solutions, and then more directly with CyberFOX today. So that's my background.
Thanks for joining, Mark. All right, so let's get into it, Reid. Let's just start off with 2023, almost over. Give us a state. If you're, and I'm an MSP, I really want to get a feel for, where are we, and maybe, what are things new, or things different in 2023? Talk to us a little bit.
Yeah. So I think from an MSP standpoint, let's just kind of start with this. This is probably brought to your attention more so on cyber insurance in 2020, 2021, right? So that's when the roller coaster started. And going up, right, we're making our way up the ride here. The increase in rates, the increase in scrutiny on controls, the underwriting practices, whether they're good or bad, you name it, all those changes, the applications going from 1 page to 7 page to 12 pages, all of that was a direct result of kind of insurers making their own bet, right? They were in a market grab early on. They didn't really fully understand what they were writing, but they said, hey, we can write business. And they weren't doing a couple things correctly. They weren't really understanding the businesses they were bringing on. So they weren't asking questions around security controls, policies, procedures, things they should have been doing. And they were not charging correctly, right? So they wanted to have low barriers to entry. And I think as Wes would say, if they could fog a mirror, they got a policy. He usually has an Oprah analogy, right? That fast forward us to today, right? So I'm just going to kind of blow through a bunch for time's sake. Now, where are we today? Today, we've seen, I think the roller coaster is not something that we want to go back down. We don't want to repeat the past, but we do want it to level off. And the good news is that it's leveled off in a way that I think insurers are understanding that they've started asking the right questions. They're gaining a better insight as to what it looks like, especially in the SME space, that businesses should have deployed to be really kind of a better risk. They're not saying you need to be, the best risk, but they're trying to find that line of best fit. And rates are starting to stabilize. So these are all good things to say, it's been tumultuous, which I think has been frustrating for everybody. But our hope was that we could find stabilization through getting good data in. That said, Andrew, we could talk about where there's still so much more room to grow. And there's better ways to go about from a process standpoint. I think we're going to cover that later in the presentation. But I think for today's standpoint, we've got MSPs, I think, that have started to better understand how this can be leveraged, because insurance is basically representing this framework that doesn't care if you're in a specific industry, a specific size. Again, I'll grab another Wesism. You got to be this tall to ride. And we finally have some good concrete direction on that, which is really encouraging. So, Will, anything you would add to that on your side? Just you being more in the trenches than I am these days.
No, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head, but that carriers are, Reid brings up the word framework. We like to say it's an evolving framework. So it's a little different from, maybe CMMC, which is going through iteration 2 right now. Like it's not like the government doesn't really upgrade things on a very quick basis, but carriers are basing requirements and all that good stuff on past underwriting data. So as more data comes in, things change in it. So it kind of evolves and changes over time, just like the industry itself. So it kind of is rapidly changing, and that's why it's so confusing to pin down.
Yeah.
Andrew, you're muted, buddy.
Thank you, Will.
Yep, no problem.
One of the things that's kind of changed is an approach. Historically, they call it outside in. You mentioned the 1 to 7 page questionnaires.
Yeah.
And those are still here, right? You're not going to get a policy without filling those out. But we're shifting to more of an inside out approach where there's telemetry and things of that nature. Can you just kind of walk the audience through those 2 different models and where you feel we're headed? And that'd be really, I think it's really interesting.
100%.
And by the way, again, I put this in chat. Please, we want this to be interactive. So if you have questions, comments, chat it up. You disagree with something or have seen something different, please, that you guys make this, a better experience, quite honestly. So go ahead, Reid.
Yeah, and I'll echo that. I think some of the things I'm probably about to say, an MSP might be going, oh, really? This is where this is headed? And lean into it, because it's just as I mentioned, the roller coaster went up. We're about to kind of enter another phase. And that phase, I think, is a lot of more change, but it's for the better. So, Andrew, your question, let's compare and contrast, kind of like, we'll call it old school, because that's how I think it's viewed right now, but it's traditional. Insurance has always done an application. They've said, hey, I need you to fill out a form to tell me who you are, what you do, what you're all about, right? And in other lines of insurance, that usually there's in parallel, there's other processes, right, to validate some of those things. Like if it's for a home, maybe you're getting a home inspection, same with a car, things like that. But for cyber traditionally, and this is kind of crazy to say out loud, right? It's, I need to better understand who you are as a risk. How risky are you? You a good risk or a bad risk? And fill out this piece of paper once a year, right? It's, tell me who you are right now in this moment. And also we're going to trust that you're telling the truth. And I'll be honest, there's a reality that was done because it's what has always been done. And also there's a path of least resistance. They're saying, well, look, we need to get the data. We're not going to get too granular here, because they're also trying to scale as businesses. And many of these are still privately run businesses. It's not standardized cyber. And so the practices really come from what they, how it is they want to drive business. So if I do the analogy of, the traditional method was, I'm going to drive by your house, right? And I'm going to evaluate your risk and the structural integrity of that house by just driving by the outside. Versus, I'd actually like to look at the beams, right? I'd like to look at the frame. I'd like to understand what the structure is made out of, things like that. You're going to better understand what it is you're insuring. So that's what, for those listening, when Andrew refers to kind of inside versus outside, the outside is that I'm just going to ask you a question on the questionnaire, and where this is slowly evolved, right? There's already a couple companies, and full disclosure, I'm part of one of those companies that's built this out for about 2 years now. And it's based off of getting real-time telemetry on the controls that are being evaluated. And a classic example would be, Andrew, I want to understand what your business, is from a risk standpoint. And part of the risk reduction I view is having, MFA enabled across all remote access. Well, you could say, sure, I've got MFA enabled, but then you just went out and you hired 20 new employees and your policy wasn't really very airtight and those employees don't have MFA enabled, right? For how long, right? Well, that's a pretty big gap. Now, if I had something in place that actually verified that MFA was in place in real time with those users, that's really concrete data that can verify that that risk is in fact doing what they said they would do. And I think some of the apprehension is, well, how are they getting that data, and how is that, from an insurer standpoint, a big question has been distribution of how that data is collected. And it's not, I think one strong thing is there's no question of what. The what is they know this is the direction this is going, and it's already there. It's more so how is that data being collected, by whom, what methods. But one last thing, and then I promise I'll get off the soapbox here, is they're, from an actuarial standpoint, insurers are very, very hungry. They do not have good data, and they're used to having good data to make the decisions, right? It's a business. They have to look at the past to understand what they want to do in the future. But for cyber, it's all brand new data, and the data they have are from those paper forms, right? It's not very good data. And so if this is really going to stabilize and really get to a point where there's more transparency, it's a product that's going to be not just a comprehensive product, but a high quality product, and its rates are going to be actually be stable, they need to be able to get better data.
Yeah, very, very good point. So you see, it's the analogy of a driver, right? Your teen driver, if you want better rates, you can put something in the car to monitor. Do you foresee that that's where we're headed, across the board eventually, Reid, to get, this industry to be better, to normalize? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, it's so funny. So Patrick just probably as you were speaking was asking the question, are insurance companies developing monitoring solutions like car driving monitor for car insurance? Yeah, so I guess there's two schools of thought right now. You do have individual companies. Actually, let me take a step back. Cyber insurance is not standardized. Okay, so you have independent companies, insurers. So like, just to name a few, like Hartford, Travelers, Chubb, these are names you've probably already heard. These are individual independent companies that they may be developing, and there are some that already have done so, to develop their own tools to say, hey, adopt this tool so we can get better data, better telemetry. And that's fine. Like, that tied to one product, one carrier. And there's others that are a little bit more agnostic, that are saying, we want to develop a tool that has the capabilities to be that plugin, but it's not tied actually specifically to any carrier per se, right? But carriers have the ability to tie into it, right? So it's a little bit of the inverse. And I'm more in favor of that simply because it allows for MSPs as a whole to, as a community, I think this is evolving. This is something that we actually can create change, right? So if we're able to represent that the controls are able, not only in place, but being managed properly, then your client should be able to get better rates. It's kind of a weird thing where if I just invested into reducing my risk, right? I just implemented a bunch of solutions, MFA, PAM, EDR, properly segregated backup, cybersecurity awareness training, you name it. But my cost for my insurance went up. That feels backwards. It should be the inverse. If I just made that investment, where's the return on my investment? So the hope is that this is forcing what I feel is right, and that you just made those investments, you should see a return on that investment. So a carrier should have the confidence to reduce your premium because you are lesser risk and they can actually prove it.
Really good stuff. I hope that helps, Patrick.
That's interesting. Actually, Andrew, just to add, as a company, I guess I'm just realizing it now, we implemented a solution earlier this year, help us get through a SOC 2 audit, but it's ongoing. SOC 2 is just kind of an ongoing approach. And we are using one of those, I think, agnostic vendors that's out there, that's making sure we have password manager, and checking all these things, all these controls in place, and providing that report. And I think in our case, right, it helps us scale. I mean, normally you'd have like a person 100% dedicated to it, and we don't have to have like a full-time 1 or 2 people just making sure we have all our controls in place ongoing. So, yeah, so it's already there. I'd be a little concerned insurance companies giving you software and putting it on your systems. That would be my concern. I don't know. So
yeah, there was that, I mean, when we were looking at this about 2 years ago, there were already some that were saying, hey, allow us to put our agent on your machines, and the universal response was nope. Right. So different ways to get that data for sure.
Yeah, cool.
Okay, so Will, over to you. You've worked with and do work with a lot of MSPs. Maybe walk us through what you see good MSPs doing and versus ones that struggle. Give us a story or two, maybe how they're using it to drive more business, reduce risk, set better pre-sales conversations. I think it'd be interesting to hear, who's doing it well and what are the characteristics versus those that struggle.
Yeah, no, it's a good prompt. I think first and foremost, when I look at MSPs who are really successful around cyber insurance, it's not so much that they're saying, hey, you know what, I'm going to start offering cyber insurance as an MSP. MSPs going and getting licensed. I don't know if how many of you actually have the time to go do that and deal with that and all the fun stuff around that. But what I have noticed is there has been an uptick in MSPs starting to take cyber insurance very seriously for their clients, because they're starting to recognize that cyber insurance is really part of the overall cybersecurity strategy that they should be implementing for their clients. I mean, when you think of cyber insurance aside, when you think of incident response, so we're talking right of boom here. We're talking you have an incident, something happens, and now the clients are trying to navigate a breach. And what they don't understand is that there's all this legal red tape, all this forensics data, all this notification, credit monitoring, not to mention PR responses, reputational stuff. There's all these things that they now have to deal with. And really what's on their mind at the time is my system's not working and I'm locked out and I can't work. So what they probably don't have the time to do is go to law school and figure out all the legal things that they need to do as a business to get things done. So cyber insurance not only funds those things, so it's not just like, hey, here's a check, go figure it out. Cyber insurance and the claims process will actually bring in the legal teams, bring in the forensics teams, bring in the PR people to help with the damage control, so that these small businesses don't have to go out of their way to try and find all these people on their own. And that's a big deal. It definitely simplifies the breach remediation process. So MSPs now looking at that saying, okay, we live in this assume breach mentality. It's not if, it's when. So my clients at some point most likely are going to go through some form of cyber attack. So if that's the case, it is imperative that I get behind cyber insurance. And the challenge is that when they're kind of reactive to it, when they wait for the traditional, we just talked all about kind of the old school model of insurance. When an MSP waits for that kind of traditional approach, the agent passes this application over to the client. The client, in their own time, brings this application over to the MSP, and the MSP fills it out, brings it back to the client. Client brings it to the agent brings it to the carrier. And then 2 days before renewal, the carrier says, oh, you need EDR on all your endpoints. We need to get that figured out. So now the MSP is scrambling, and that's the reactive approach. So the MSPs who have become more successful around cyber insurance, and I know we've covered this on some of the masterclass stuff we did with you, Andrew, a couple months ago, is to take the reins from the agent and say, I'm going to get effective dates. I'm going to get copies of policies. I'm going to know exactly what my client is covered for. And I'm going to know what phone number to call in the event of an incident, so that my client, because I don't want to risk my client's claim getting denied because the first thing I'm doing is restoring the backups. So it's really understanding the whole incident response process and how cyber insurance plays into that, because like it or not, cyber insurance is a piece of MSP services. I mean, incident responses.
Well, let me just ask this, and maybe Reid chime in too. So, we've talked about outside in versus inside out. You've shared a big piece of, what happens in an incident. Are you seeing, why aren't we seeing, maybe a requirement of walking a customer through a tabletop of some type? And I know this is kind of arduous and maybe very subjective, but I mean, the real cost, you could have a bunch of security controls in place and we could be checking a bunch of boxes, But, when the rubber hits the road, if, we don't have good segmentation and backups are destroyed, if we don't have we can't collect logs correctly and forensics can't do anything, if there's not a communications, if the organization doesn't know, if I'm the president and I don't know who to call or who's in charge, and on and on and on, if I'm the insurer, I'm like, man, yeah, they have these controls in place, but they're a disaster once.
Yeah.
So does that make sense? That, like,
Yeah,
in that whole thing.
I like to, there's two things that you hit on that I think is really important. You talk about proper segmentation for backups and the right approach to your backups, or how you're logging and your actual patching cadence and all this kind of stuff. And carriers on their applications, going back to what Reid was talking about, seem to be pretty black and white. They're not getting into the nitty-gritty of a lot of this stuff. So it's the kind of thing where even if you fit the bill for a good cyber policy from the carrier risk perspective, are you really doing everything you should be to protect your data in the event of an incident? So there's that. But then the other piece is there are questions. Again, we're going to application here, but there are questions on these applications about having an incident response plan vetted by management, understood. What is your approach? And that's obviously not asked by every carrier across the board, although it probably should be. Reid,
Yeah, and let me chime in on this real quick, Andrew, because I think one key piece of that is it's being asked, but understanding the quality of that exercise doesn't happen unless an incident occurs,
right?
In which they may then go through their forensics and go, well, wait a minute. So it's a bit backwards, right? And so to your question, it's like, why wouldn't they? Well, you still have carriers are trying to grow naturally, and they're trying to find the line of best fit of what are the adoptable solutions and practices that we think the SME market via this application method. We talk about internal, we can now really accelerate this without having a high level of cost, but they still view a high level of cost being, this needs to be, if we need to verify it, we can on the back end, but we don't want something to be prohibitive on the sales side to a degree as well. Yeah. So does that make sense?
It does. And I wish I could pull Brian Blakely up on stage, because he's we're doing something with him tomorrow, and Brian put it in there. If you like, he's a master at, he's a cyber practitioner who's owned multiple MSPs, then a group of, we built security programs with CISOs. I'm just setting the stage. Like, yeah. I've never heard him once not talk to a business and pre-sales or whatever about how they make money and what are the critical systems and processes that drive that. I set the stage there to go, that's a big piece missing from most business continuity and automated backup strategies that we see once an incident occurs. Because if I talk to many of the incident response teams that work, with through MSPs and with MSPs, and the data, like, hey, what's the most critical data? A lot of times it's a blank stare. Or what are the most critical systems that have to come out first? What are the RTO, RPO for that? And all of that's missing. So I put that out to you, Reid. Is or will that be considered ever? Or is it just because it's seen as such a sales inhibitor? And again, Brian, please feel free to chime in on that if I misspoke, or how you'd approach it too.
Yeah, no, it's like when I first started talking to this industry, which included so many security savvy folks who, ahead of when this all changed, they were already saying, look, they need to be looking at some basics, right? And it, it was said well in advance, you need to be looking at the core controls in this way, and look at policies, procedures, blah, blah, blah. So I feel like so many of the aspects of a good risk, right, we can define and say, look, if you were doing these things specifically, it's not that you're untouchable, but man, your exposure goes down significantly. Even if you do get hit, right? To your point, the blast radius is so much lower.
Right.
But it's kind of time versus effort still. This is my personal view, okay, on what I see insurers doing is that, yeah, they want to still have a conducive sales process. And right now, you would be amazed, Andrew, if you got on some of these phone calls, you either flip the table or probably turn off your camera, because there's some of the things that are said are like, well, we actually might, I've heard this said out loud, I think we're being a little bit too aggressive on certain pieces that we want to scale back because we're not as competitive. Right. So they're still trying to like find that balance. And like, I'm not going to name names, but I hear them say that and I go, well, you just lost credit to me because, you know, we're not going back to the dark ages. Right. But they're still trying to view a scalable business. They got to find that line of best fit to where do we get enough information? It's organized gambling, folks. So like, I'm just saying it. That's what insurance is. They're trying to place their bets appropriately. But if you were looking at this and saying, well, losses right now on an average are above 40%, and they're saying that's still good, right? Where 2 years ago, carriers were losing money, and now they finally worked their way back to a 40% loss ratio. I go, well, if you just slow down and just be a little bit more meticulous, yeah, you won't write as much. But if that 40% is a 10% loss ratio, I mean, what's the difference, right? So yeah, you're not wrong, Andrew. It just is still a little bit of a battle with how they want to scale.
Will, over to you on controls, and what are you seeing these days is that the must-haves to get decent coverage. You know, we're certainly going to be talking to Mark shortly about controls 5 and 6, because that's really where you know, privilege access management, you know, we're going to talk about that, but that's one that, you know, was really nowhere, you know, quote unquote, in our market, you know, certainly an enterprise and upper mid market, but it was no CyberFOX, like you didn't see it as like such a critical, and all of a sudden, you know, and I think it has to do, and I want your take here, Will, and certainly chime in, Reid. You know, we know what the top attacks are, you know, this year, you know, credentials and web apps from a TT, you know, the international access brokers are just absolutely crushing everybody, and, you know, social engineering reigns king. So sorry for digressing, Will, I'll bring it back. Like what are the controls, the must controls that, you know, everybody needs, and where do you, what are you seeing being added or in the upcoming, you know, year or so?
Yeah, well, I'll go through those controls, and then I want to make a quick comment on what you just said, but let me hit those controls first. I mean, we talk about them all the time. MFA needs to be enabled. I think Reid brought them all up earlier. MFA, segregated backup solutions, EDR, next gen antivirus, patching within 30 days. That's a clear one. And I learned recently when I was at a CMMC conference that CMMC says you have to have a patching solution too that doesn't actually have a set date, right? It's just you need to have one. And so it's really interesting as you look, even the carriers have slightly different parameters than other organizations. So understand that it's not just a patching cadence, it's within 30 days. They want to see for high and critical vulnerabilities. And then one that is really important, and I want to segue over to that PAM conversation, or the PAM piece you just brought up, is security awareness training has become very important to carriers. And because every year it's somewhere between 75 and 85% of all cyber incidents involve some sort of human error in the attack, right? I mean, it's huge. That's the majority of attacks. And, you know, MFA is preventing someone from hard password guessing. Backups are there to help restore things, but you clicking an email, you doing something that you're not supposed to do, can't really stop someone from doing that, but you can educate them. And that's why I think PAM is, and you talk about the evolutionary controls, SEG, like secure email gateway, email filtering, things like that, going from just standard EDR to 24/7 MDR. So we're going from, hey, I set up this Ring alarm in my house that goes off and wakes me up in the middle of the night, to I now subscribe to Ring Pro. So when that goes off, someone at a call center is immediately calling the cops, calling me, making sure everything's going on. You have something to add to that, Andrew?
Well, I was just going to ask you, and I want to, you know, Aaron, there were some few questions, so I promise you guys we're going to, Aaron had a good one in there. But what about, and again, money aside, because again, this is going to add, you know, probably 5 a seat, but maybe your comments, and then Reid, you know, access control or ZTNA, you know, if we know that, you know, it's a human, more, you know, high, let's call it 80% of the time that is going to do something, you know, why aren't we, forcing, specific access control? So even if I'm phished, it is so narrow in terms of what they can do, right? In terms of the next step, in the, being able to elevate privileges and move laterally. So love your comments there.
I think when carriers are adding these, and Reid, feel free to jump in, but when carriers are beginning to add these control requirements, one of the questions they have to ask is this doable enough on a wide scale? So like, if you brought up enterprise level before, Andrew, if the only people who are capable of implementing a particular control, no matter how important it is an enterprise level, we can't require this of small businesses in order to get cyber insurance. It just doesn't work. So I think that's a big piece of how they're determining. So when you look at things like PAM tools, that when I think of the large element of cybersecurity, or the largest factor for cyber incidents is that human element, then a PAM tool makes sense logically, because now this person can't install Spotify on their own computer. They also can't install that fake Spotify they downloaded earlier thinking it was the real thing that's going to infect their computer with malware, right? And that's, to me, they may look exactly the same, and that's part of the issue, is that when you don't have the PAM control in place, you're now setting up another opportunity for a human error, which is the largest possible link to an incident.
Let me comment. Go, Reid. Go.
I was just going to say, just to piggyback on Will's, he hit the nail on the head. Let's go back to my previous comments about what our insurers are looking at from a prohibitive, probably, ask versus a achievable ask. And I think that's where, like, certain solutions, it's a lot easier at the enterprise space. When you start to go scale into the SMB space, right, you have to also be looking at what is actually accessible for the consumer and what's reasonable, right? So, like, we could go into a lot of other policies, procedures as well, right, that we know would make a very big difference. But they go back to their process and say, is this something that's achievable, relatively speaking, to whom I'm asking, that they could do it, and I think a slightly cost-effective way. And I think that's where this is, the whole evolution of all of this, including CyberFOX right now, is bringing tools from the enterprise space too, that are not only it's achievable, but it's cost-effective as well. Where before that didn't really exist.
Good point. Mark, any comment before I'm going to go to some of the questions in chat? I think there's some good ones.
I think, just kind of one thing, it's unique. We talk enterprise, whether it's enterprise probably is defined as it's an IT department. It can be, right? It's a kind of a one-to-one. It's hell of a lot easier for that IT department to be the bad guy and kind of put their thumb on everybody and lock them down with privilege. The MSP is definitely unique. It's not just one, group of end users. It's all these different businesses and all these different needs and things like that. So something that we do there at CyberFOX, and it does make it easy to have to allow them to get the privilege they need at the time they need it, but on an ongoing basis not have that. So we definitely have accounted for that. Works really well, in our case, and the end users ultimately. The biggest thing is, why wouldn't you do certain things? That's the CEO. You go ahead and he doesn't have to use SS, whatever it is, or MFA, whatever, right? So there's always these unique things. So as an industry, we need to be sure that we try to, why do we have those one-offs, and can we make it consistent across the board for all of our customers? So I think that's key. Yep. Okay.
So Reid, I don't know if you can answer this, but Aaron asked a good question. How are they defining segregated backups? Do they really have a clear? Because again, you already said it. One carrier views things one way, another views it another way. How might you help him understand that?
Yeah, I mean, immutable backups, segregated backups. I mean, at the end of the day, are they actually testing to see, do they have a definition on the application defining what they mean there? And are they actually testing to see if it matches that definition? No, they are not, right? What they're asking though is, is this a backup that actually is completely segregated, that wouldn't be tied to the network, that would allow for a full restoration, right? And obviously restoration that would include said infected virus, right? But Will, anything you would add to that?
No, I mean, a lot of times the question we get from MSPs is, does cloud count as segregated? And yeah, it does. I mean, it's not on their local network, right? And that's the idea. You can shut it off from the network itself, and that to them that's segregated. And in a lot of ways, I'm surprised they're not asking specifically for cloud backups anymore. But then in a lot of ways, I'm not, because they're behind on most things.
Yeah. Let me add something of color just real quick to that question. There's so much gray area on these questions too. And if you're looking at the questions and you're asking yourself this very thing, right? Like, what do they mean? How do they define that? This feels not black and white. This feels gray. You're not alone. And that's part of the evolution that we're seeing.
Reid, I'm going to go down here to Brian's comment, which is excellent in a minute, but I'm sure Jim Lippy would give me a high five if he could hear this. But with like SaaSless or whatever, I shouldn't just say SaaSless, whatever monitoring solution for M365, right? I'm just baffled. Like, why isn't that on there? Because if you think about where, we all, like, again, look at every major threat report. Credentials are the number one, right? Brokers, typically through an email, right? Credentials being sold, right? I mean, just look at the MoveIt vulnerability, and I think it's 62 million and counting. So if we know a threat actor is going to get into a M365 account, starts a spear phishing campaign, that we're looking for some type of anomalous behavior out of that M365, like, why isn't that? And one I'll throw on top of it, like, are we going to get to the point of phishing resistant MFA? Because most MFA is being bypassed these days as well. So can you help us?
Yeah, I think it's not going to be the answer that anyone's hoping for, but here's the reality is you've got independent companies that are making decisions independently, and they're trying to assess what do we need in place and why, right? So like, who's in whose ear? Who's the actually, let me tell a quick story, because Dustin was on the last CyberCall, Andrew, and I mean, Dustin will how do I want to put this? He will not pump his own chest around this, and he should. But we've talked to insurers a lot, and he has been sitting there as easily the smartest guy around security and technology. And we're talking to top level carriers, right? And so I guess what I'm trying to say is, we can look at that collectively right now, and we say, why aren't they doing this? Why aren't they that? In some realities, they haven't even approached talking about it yet. In a lot of situations, they're reacting to touching the stove and going, oh, it's hot. And they go, oh, that's a thing. And you're also dealing with something that insurance is not used to having to constantly be on the move, right? For every other line of coverage, from a process standpoint, they're used to defining it, knowing how it operates, what is the peril, what is the exposure, and here's how we underwrite it. Fire has not changed, right? Auto has changed in very little small ways, but we've been able to see it. Home, same deal, but like, this is the nuances here.
Can I say one thing on that, Reid?
Yeah.
Like, auto and home has changed for the better. I mean, everything about houses and cars have gotten safer in terms of construction, in terms of controls. Cyber is the opposite, where the danger just keeps escalating and escalating. So the security controls are made to meet the threat, and then a new threat emerges, right? So the way that you're able to defend it, it just doesn't work the same. They're not going to have consistent data, and because of that, I mean, new controls are going to continuously keep coming, and that's the whole idea.
Mark, how about for you? And I promise we'll go back to more questions, but when we talk about CIS controls, it's really been adopted heavily. And again, we're not married to CIS, but it's very prescriptive. It's great. So I'm just going to use it to set the stage here. Controls 5 and 6, where you see PAM's solution, or at least CyberFOX's solutions show up. Are you seeing cyber insurance drive, like, hey, Mark, we're into, your sales team? Is it cyber insurance driving a lot of those conversations? Is it other things? Talk to us about what you're seeing there.
I think it's a combination. The reason we partnered up here with FifthWall is because they're seeing that from their customers as they're calling. And then we have MSPs kind of going the other way around. I got this piece of paper I got to fill out, and I need to solve these. And actually recently, kind of a little anecdotal, we're we're recording this week. One of our, I think they're local here in Florida. We're based out of Florida. Partners, for the first time, because he is putting controls in place, and he does have a solution like ours, in addition to others, right? His rates didn't go up for the first time for the upcoming year. So that was like an amazing, apparently that's an amazing story in this space. So, so we're capturing that. And yeah, so I think as you look at that, so when, I know someone was mentioning about cost of solutions, that is probably where, like, okay, I know I can lower my level of risk and I'm saving X amount on insurance, maybe that's a zero sum, where it doesn't really cost you additional money to have, more control there. Yeah. So in the case of our customers, you guys hit it on the head. It is all about, ultimately, it's going to be people that are making mistakes, and then the bad actors get through the organization and do a whole bunch of things. And yeah, so that's why, we believe in these areas in CIS. And I think really it comes down to any controls, just pick whatever there's a bunch out there, and pick them and then follow down that path. We do that here for ourselves as a cybersecurity software company as well. We do follow along those lines, and 5 and 6, they happen to relate to accounts, passwords, administrating configurations, and those are the things that can end up being mistakes, or even if you don't have the right password policy, or you're changing policies, or you're letting people know. Honestly, this is a great story. One of our sales folks called an MSP the other day, and you got the voicemail, and the voicemail said, "Hey, if you're a customer, text me your password and I'll help you out." So it's still out there that we're making mistakes. It's not just a sticky note. Now you can leave a password on a voicemail, apparently. But yeah, it is those common things, and where these, again, it's not just tools like us, but it's the process and everything else around it. They're very important to reduce that risk ultimately, and ultimately, right, the goal is for all of us is hopefully we don't have to take advantage of that cyber insurance policy, right? And we need those controls in place for that. Yeah.
Good stuff. Boy, Patrick, I was reading your question over and over. I'm just wondering if I got the spirit of it correct, because it sounds like you're asking about multiple regulatory type requirements. Maybe you could just summarize. Is it like, how do I manage it, which would typically be some type of gosh, Brian, I wish you could chime in here. I'm drawing a blank, but a governance, so
GRC platform.
Yeah, is that what you're getting at? I'm not 100% sure, but one of the I think it was Jeff asked a really good question, Reid. What about scanning?
Yeah.
Because again, like, it was usually like, I mean, I'm going to joke around from a threat actor perspective. I mean, they hear Fortinet, which, what a great company, but my gosh, would they get their crap together? Because, I mean, all a threat actor has to do is go to Shodan as soon as they hear there's some 0-day with Fortinet, and there's an absolute field day. But so anyway, talk to us about internal, external scans. Where does that all fit in?
I'll keep this brief because you'll trigger me if we go deeper. Because basically, they're doing external scans, right? And they're doing them using different tools, different vendors. You're getting different results, and you've got folks on the insurance side that may or may not recognize that the discovered vulnerability is benign, but they don't care. Okay, they see something come up, and so here's our experience: is they're leaving it to external for right now. And I guess I have a theme right now. It is because they need to be operating quickly. Like, we have yet to see internal scanning yet. Not to say that's not too common. It's not to say like that's really important, but they're sticking to external, and it's kind of hit or miss right now, because some carriers are doing it at bind, and they're saying we got to run this scan real quick to make sure. Some are running a scan quarterly, all right, and some of those scans are coming back and they're productive. And it's great. Like, we found relevant vulnerabilities that need to be patched. Great. And then at other times, they're harping on things that aren't relevant. So, I mean, to answer that question, right now, sticking to external, I really hope slowly but surely it does get to a legitimate internal where we can actually get more legitimate data that isn't just 1/10 of the picture, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Actually, let's see. A bunch of questions just came in. Sorry. Lewis has a good question. Reid, do carriers penalize clients that make claims? And this is, I think, really important for two reasons. One, one thing I want to point out to MSPs that I really hope you work on is in your agreements, do your clients know where your MSA ends, your managed service agreement ends, and incident response begins? Really important. We could spend literally, a session on that alone. But to Lewis's question, Reid, hey, if I did have a good demarc that my clients know that, hey, I work a certain amount of time, and then when we think there could be an incident, we have a partnership with a third party, they come in, validate. Is it wrong and is it bad? Like, hey, we don't want to call our homeowner because about too low of a, like, oh, I got some rock through the window because my rates are going to through the roof. So I think, sorry for blabbing here, but it's a good question. Like,
it's relatable. I hit a deer the other night, and it wasn't bad, but it was a bump, right? And part of my grill's busted, and I'm asking myself the same thing. I'm like, is this worth it? I got to look at the cost. And anyway, I want to cherry pick into this because there was a question from Keith earlier. You brought up MSAs, and it was around, where was it real quick? If a forensics team is brought in the underwriter, it seems like that the carrier may be looking for a way to put blame or responsibility on MSP. One disclaimer to everyone on the call: the carrier is engaged in a contract directly with the insured, the client, right? So keep that in mind. Where your liability comes into play is what were that client's expectations to do? Would they hold you responsible, right? At the end of the day, so just maintain that mindset. If you fear the carrier, don't fear your client's carrier. Fear the client and the expectations they may have and it is or is not within your MSA. So do carriers penalize clients? So yes and no. Standard practice of insurance, right, is you file a claim, your rates go up to a degree, right? Now, it is far better than it was even a year ago, because a year ago, if you had a claim on file, many carriers just would straight up not write you. You would get dropped from that carrier that you just had the claim. They'd pay the claim, and they'd say, we're not going to renew you next year. And then you go out to find a new carrier, and you kind of had a scarlet S on you, and you wouldn't be able to find. Now, that has changed, especially with now the logical thinking of you're dealing with a client that now has experienced pain, and they've taken proper measures. So a client that is paid, has gone through the claims process, yes, they're likely going to be paying more. Are they going to be neglected? No. What the carrier is going to be looking for, though, is detailed documentation of what happened, what they did to correct, and how did they increase the security posture.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that real quick, Andrew, 2 seconds. It's the mindset of, I like to say, when you were in middle school and you did something bad and got in trouble, you had to write that essay of what did I learn from this incident, right? And so every carrier should be looking at a client and saying they've been through it and they don't want it to happen again. So technically, they should be a better risk to me. That's logically the case.
I think it's an excellent point. Brian has a good question here. He goes, how do you envision the role of cyber liability insurance, cyber risk liability insurance adapting over the next 5 years to better protect MSPs and their clients? You want to take that one, Reid?
Yeah, so just so everyone's clear, what an MSP really needs to make sure they have is tech E&O insurance. Tech E&O, tech errors and omissions, for you as an MSP includes your own cyber coverage, in addition for coverage that, your client sees an error or an omission in your services, and that results in X, right? Litigation, suit, whatever it may be. So in a situation where we see MSPs playing a more pivotal role in the management, right? And you see carriers start to understand that. This is hypothetical, so just to be clear, but my hypothesis is that if you are recognizing that MSPs are playing a critical role and not just the implementation of the controls carrier looking for, but the management of them, right? You have real-time telemetry that's verifying that part of an MSP's exposure on your tech E&O is your client's exposure. This is a very good reason why you need to understand what your clients have at the very base level. Do they have cyber insurance or not? And so I do see those evolving. I do see them being running in parallel. And I do see cause and effect to a good MSP that showcases that have good clients that also are in turn demonstrating good risk management should see, right? They should be married. That makes sense.
To that, I know we only have 2 minutes left here. Reid, if you're an MSP, should you require cyber insurance? Not necessarily tell them how much, because that's a slippery slope. If you ask Eric Tildes on the legal side, you do not want to say we require X amount, because if it's more, and then you said that then you're in a world of challenges. But in general, if you're an MSP, Reid, do you require it?
I would.
Yeah.
Right. I think you need to ask your client to show proof of coverage. That's what it comes down to. Yeah. And it goes back to my original comment. Their exposure is your exposure. It's a legitimate thing that you want to understand, and it helps you evaluate. It doesn't necessarily mean they won't be your client, but you need to understand. It's really important for you to understand.
Yeah, it's good, really good stuff.
And you could put the wording in there, Andrew, requiring comprehensive cyber insurance. Doesn't give a limit, but it's saying, hey, we want you to carry more than just some dinky add-on to your general liability. So we want our clients to carry something that's actually going to protect them.
So let's do one last question. I know we're at the top of the hour here. If you guys don't mind, I'll also put up the slide with the QR code one more time for everybody. But Aaron has a good one there. Any advice on any advice on new? Do not want to be touching anything, even in an incident here. Gosh, I'm sorry, Aaron. I'm not quite understanding. Can you decipher that one?
I got it. So I think.
Oh, go ahead. Reid.
Yeah. And I think there was a question to this earlier. Generally speaking, right? Carriers are going to say, we want our own IR process to come in. We, as the carrier, are going to put up the police tape, and it's going to go, we're running the playbook. As an MSP, the right thing to do is, if you have the ability, is to understand each of your clients' insurer's process. You call them and you say, hey, what's the playbook here on my involvement in IR? And at the very least, you should be asking, okay, what about just isolation and containment? So for boots on the ground as an MSP that's already there and you're already the most familiar with that client's network, we're not talking about uploading from backups, right? We're just talking isolation and containment. Typically, carriers are fine with that. I think it's more of, they want to make sure, and we've seen plenty of the horror stories of, actually, I'll use as an example, an MSP who's trying to do best, they're trying to do good to get their client up and running. They restore from backups, not really testing those backups and verifying they actually probably just made things worse. So I think if that's what you were asking, Aaron.
Awesome. So in closing, first off, thank you for everybody that stayed till a few minutes after. To our host, Reid, Will, Mark, thank you. Awesome. I thought it was fantastic. Great content. Mandy, thanks for putting this together. And the audience, thank you so much as well. Again, I have 2 QR codes up there. If you're going to be at IT Nation in the pre-days, come join the folks at CyberFOX over at Top Golf. Spend a lot of their money on high-end beverages like that. And then if you want to learn more about it, they have a gift card you can win over here and their demo next week. So awesome job, guys. Really appreciate the time together, as always. And until next time, wishing everybody out there a happy and healthy week. Stay safe, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.